So you want to get into developing color negative film, but you heard it's a bit of a pain. Today, I'm going to give you the 3 reasons why developing C-41 at home is even easier than developing black and white. Hey, what's up guys? Carrington Snow here, and today we are talking C-41 developing. C-41 is the most popular color film process, and it was introduced by Kodak back in 1972. Your Portras, your 400Hs, Ektar, Ultramax Gold, Lomo 400, they all use the same standardized process. And that leads me to our first advantage over black and white developing. So if you're new to developing, or primarily a black and white home developer, you may be wondering what's involved in this process. Well, it's a developer, a bleach fixer, then a wash, and then a final rinse. It's not all that different from developing black and white, and the best part is the times and the agitation recommendations are the same for all the films I just listed earlier. When I shoot black and white on my 4x5, I end up with strange combinations of X-ray films and old school developers like Rodinal. And with those combinations, there's no documentation, and it leads to a world of experimentation just to find the right combination of effective ISOs and developing times and temps. With this C-41 process, all that's simplified. Develop for 3 minutes 30 seconds at 102 degrees Fahrenheit. Done. Our next advantage over black and white is a little more of a personal preference, and that's temperature control. Like I mentioned, C-41 process is normally done at 102 degrees Fahrenheit. So how do you achieve this temperature throughout the entire process? Well, there's a few methods, but if you're serious about this, there's only one real method I can recommend, and that's a sous vide. A sous vide, it circulates water over a heating element that includes this like closed loop temperature control system, and it allows you a very specific temperature control that you can maintain over a certain period of time. It's usually used in cooking, but in this case, it's an invaluable tool for C-41. Now, how could this contraption possibly be an advantage over black and white? For me, it's the ability to set a temp and totally forget about it. I preheat my chemicals while I'm loading my film in the change bag, and by the time I'm done, it's usually up to temperature and I'm ready to go. With black and white developing, typically recommended developer temps are 68 degrees. Unfortunately, the chemicals in my household, they stay around 70, 72 degrees, and the water coming out of the faucet 65. So often I fiddle around with like this quick ice bath to bring the chemicals down to temperature, but there's no easy, reliable temperature control like a sous vide for bringing the temperature down. To me, this temperature control for C-41, it's a huge benefit. So unlike most black and white developers, which are one-shot developers, a single C-41 kit like this can develop over 20 rolls of 35mm 120 film. And when I mean over, I mean over. I've done over 30 rolls and had zero degradation in performance. What you should consider when developing C-41 is that every roll of film that passes through the developer exhausts it just a little bit. And so you can make up for this by extending the development times to kind of counteract that diminishing effectiveness of those chemicals. There's a formula that I use to figure out how long my development times are going to be as a function of the previous processed rolls. And here it is. So you just take N, which is the number of rolls that have been processed in the past, plug it into the formula, and that'll give you your new development time. So speaking of development times, for the most part, this process is even quicker than standard black and white development. For my D76, my HC110, my Rodinal dilutions, I usually end up with like a 8 to 12 minute development. And that may not seem like a huge deal or a difference, but it actually saves a lot of time whenever you're doing 5 or 6 dev cycles straight. Saving those 5 minutes in between of waiting and agitating, that's a huge win for me. All right, now I'm gonna load up some film, take you along as I do some C-41 developing. Let's go. All right, so I have a medium-sized Patterson tank here, some gloves, a changing bag, and then the film for today, which is some Fuji 400H, some Lomo 400, and then some Portra 400. So I personally like wearing gloves whenever I'm loading up film. My hands get super sweaty whenever they're inside the changing bag, and that humidity actually makes it really difficult to load the film onto the reels. The film just will not slide past these little rollers that are on the loading reels. So even though you see me only loading up 2 reels here, I'm actually double loading one of them with 2 rolls of 120. There's a cool trick that you can do if you have to, process 3 or 4 rolls at once. Leave me a comment if you want to see that kind of done. So I think the next purchase that I'm going to do is a changing tent instead of this bag that I have. It's fine for loading up, roll film onto these reels, but loading multiple 4x5 holders, it proves to be pretty difficult, with the size constraints of the bags. Like I said before, this whole time while I'm loading up the film, the chemicals are all warming up. Remember, the readout on the sous vide shows you the circulating water temp, not the internal temperature of the chemicals. So make sure you're still using a thermometer to check your temps. All right, so here's my setup. I have my swizzle stick over here, but honestly, I just do inversions nowadays. There's my Patterson tank lid and tank, and my funnel for putting the chemicals back into their glass bottles. Doing a couple final checks here on temperature, and I think we are ready to go. Okay, so first off, it's going to be the pre-wash, and this just gets the chemicals up to temperature. One trick I learned for actually getting a good seal with the Patterson tank lid is kind of washing it in hot water before putting it on for the first time. It just becomes more pliable and seals a lot nicer. Dumping the pre-wash always has some kind of color like this. It varies manufacturer to manufacturer. Now it's time for the developer, and it's important to keep track of the time with the stopwatch. You can see here I'm swizzling, but now I just put the lid on and do 4 inversions before going right into the water. It's important to keep the tank in the sous vide water as much as you can. This helps keep a consistent temperature the entire dev cycle. I like to do my inversions every minute. I learned from some other people online that actually very vigorous inversions can actually be helpful for grain. So out comes the developer, and in comes the Blix. Make sure you reset your timer and go for another 6.5 minutes. I take this time to wash off my developer from everything and get ready for when I dump the Blix. Same deal, 4 inversions every minute. All right, now it's time for the rinse. I like to do a few dump it fills and then let the water run for a few minutes after that. Okay, so now you can see I'm pouring the stabilizer. This is not something I really do anymore. It's still recommended from the chemical manufacturers. Anytime after the Blix step, the film is light safe, so you can go ahead and remove the top, and I pour in my clean water along with my photo flow. This makes sure I have absolutely no watermarks. A few drops goes a long way with this stuff. All right, and here we go. That's some developed film. So what are some disadvantages of C-41 developing over black and white? Well, the shelf life can be a bit of a concern if you're used to old school developers like Rodinal, which literally last forever. Once the chemicals are mixed up, expect them to work for 6 to 8 weeks. And personally, I've used a kit that lasted over 6 months and didn't show any signs of degradation. It's definitely something to think about whenever you're starting color development. Another one is kind of the availability of chemicals. In the past few years, chemicals have been kind of hard to come by sometimes. There's periods of time where the Cenistil and Tentanol kits that are sold, they're sold out everywhere and won't come back into stock for months. So it hasn't been an issue recently, and whenever I need a kit, I usually buy 2 or 3 at a time, so I know I'll have plenty for the foreseeable future. But when talking about the kits, I usually recommend going with the liquid kits over the powdered versions. They're just so easy to mix up, and you just can't go wrong with them. All right, guys, that wraps it up for today. Give me some tips and tricks that you have for developing color film. Leave a comment below and let me know if you agree that actually color film isn't as intimidating as it's made out to be. See you in the next one.